Welcome to our podcast, Raising Big. This podcast is an ongoing conversation between myself and my young adult son. And today we have an invited guest. We're ready and willing to talk about all the things families might experience in their lives and relationships, both as parents and young adults, from teens to 20 somethings, the good, the bad, and sometimes the ugly. In this episode, we're talking about how to best support your college student. Our guest today is my oldest son and Cade's big brother, Sawyer. We're about halfway through this first semester of school this year, and it's about now that things can get a little bumpy for college kids. If students are away at school, they could be thriving or they could be really homesick. If they're living at home, the stress can be palpable as adjustments are made to having another full fledged adult moving into a new stage of life, all under the same roof with their parents. Parents could really be missing their bigs, and it could also be really hard to hear about struggles from afar or to not over involve yourself in solving the issues for your students. So let's dive in. I'm Marcy, and I'm the mom.
I'm Cade, and I'm her kid. Welcome to Raising Big, Sawyer. This is our first guest we've had on the podcast. So, Sawyer, please tell us a little bit why the topic of how supporting your college student for both parents and for bigs is important to you and how you come to be so passionate about it.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you both for having me. And I also, for some reason, wanted to say I'm Sawyer and I'm also her kid. So, why this topic is really important to me. I have, attended college. I did my bachelor's degree not too long ago in 2016. And then I've also done some graduate school as well. And so, throughout my own experience, my mom has been a really great supporter of me, and my family has been really there for me throughout the entire process. And so, as I was really thinking about what I might want to do with my future career, I ended up realizing that I wanted to work in higher education. So, professionally as well, I work with college students now and really help them get through the process of getting through school, whether that's, picking classes, financial aid, or even just navigating life as a student and as a person who's really coming into their own. So, I'm really excited to talk about how to best support your college student today. And again, thank you so much for having me on Raising Bigs.
For
You're
sure.
welcome, and you've really had a great experience, on both sides of the realm, right? Like you've dealt with yourself as a student in that experience, but then also dealt with what students are experiencing. I know you deal with a very diverse student population and have in your various roles dealt with both kids who lived on campus far away from home and also kids who are commuting to a school. So every situation, right, has been unique, but those kids still need support, right? Grown kids, bigs, as we call them on our show. So, what advice would you give to parents about connecting with their students? And I'd like you to really focus on how it needs to be on the student's terms, not the parent driving that outcome. So, what does that look like in your experience?
Yeah, so this is a good question. And I think honestly, one of the most important pieces of maintaining that relationship with your big when they go off into their college experience. As you mentioned, every single student's experience is different, right? Some of them might be moving hours away to a campus where they're moving into a dorm. There might be students where they're driving, to and from the campus every day. There might also be your student might also be taking their classes online. I know Cade has taken his a lot of his classes online. And so really that experience looks different for every student. And so connecting with your student is going to look drastically different whether they're living in a bedroom in your house or if they're living hours away. For me, when I moved away for both of my college experiences, it was really important that my mom was in communication with me, but in really a way that made sense and was also like comfortable for me as a young adult really moving into the world. It can be really nerve-wracking and there can be a lot of anxiety around, oh, how I'm gonna, function daily. How am I going to get myself to and from class? I'm gonna make sure I'm taking care of myself, right? But I really believe, both for myself, but also as I've seen for my peers and for my students, is that it's really important that students are really able to kind of step into their own identity and, really be able to kind of come into their own. Oftentimes parents, when they're raising their bigs and now they're finally heading off to college, there can be moments where you are very involved in your child's life, whether that's to and from academics, sports, personal things, having dinner with them every night, right? Setting doctor's appointments. And so oftentimes you can be really involved in your child's life. And so that changes a lot, right? When your student goes off to college, and you really have to have that opportunity and give them that opportunity to really come into their own and really grow.
I really like that you brought up how it's important to kind of meet your student where they're at. And like you said, whether they're going to online classes or they're commuting or they're staying in a dorm or it's their senior year, whatever their situation is, and not even just based on how they're doing school, but also who they are as a person, just kids in general. Some are naturally going to want their parent to be more involved and maybe they want to share what's going on. And then there's other kids who are going to want, a little more distance. So kind of just, figuring out where your student is at and what works for you guys in your relationship.
So, Cade, your experience has been very different than Sawyer's, right? Sawyer went
Mm-hmm.
away and he lived on campus. You have lived at home and you've been to going to school online. So those are, both sides of the equation are very different. So as far as me supporting you, Cade, how has
Mm-hmm.
that looked different than maybe what would have been best for Sawyer? I still wanted to do things on your terms and let you kind of guide that. But
Mm-hmm.
as an online at home student, what did you think about the pieces that I did to help support you and what was most important in that?
For sure. Obviously, I can't compare it. So maybe, Sawyer, you can kind of weigh in on how mom was there for you. But from my perspective, it felt like you almost kind of had to make more of a conscious effort to kind of give me that space to, be a grown adult because when, Sawyer moved away, he's out of your house. You're not seeing him every day. He's, doing his own thing. He's doing his own meals. He's going to his own classes, all that stuff. Versus for me, I'm still seeing you every day. I'm still, there were times where we were still eating together. There were times, all that. So I think it's easier in that sense to kind of become over involved in your
Mm-hmm.
child's, as they're getting old because you're seeing them every day. So it's a natural instinct to say, oh, did you finish your homework? Or, oh, how is this going? Or things like that. Whereas I think when Sawyer was out, there's not kind of that everyday interaction of you guys seeing each other. So I think it almost has to be a little bit more of a conscious effort. There's a balance that I think you have to find. And I think we found it of supporting me and, being interested in what I'm going through and things like that, but also giving me that space to, kind of fly on my own.
I think you're absolutely right. I had to be very intentional about both sides of that, like not being over involved, but also making sure I was intentional about asking you about your college journey and supporting you and not just assuming that because I see you shut in your room for an hour that classes are going well, right? Where with Sawyer, biggest concerns when he went away to school was, oh my gosh, is this kid drinking enough water? Like why that was my fixation, I don't know. But I didn't have to worry about that with you because I saw you carrying your water bottle around all day, right?
Uh-huh.
So I know a lot of times it's the little things parents worry about, but I know, Sawyer, we've also talked about it's the little things that parents can do for you when you're away. Can you kind of tell me what some of those were and maybe give some parents some ideas on how they can do little things for their kids that might make a big difference?
Yeah, of course. And I think it's funny you brought up the water thing because I think so often parents, they worry about the fundamentals, right? It's the drinking the water, the eating the meals, the getting enough sleep. But for your student, right? Like, trust me, they're going to be eating plenty. They're going to be maybe drinking not as much water as maybe they should, but they're still getting some, right? But really for me and the way that you kind of best showed up to support me was in ways that honestly I didn't even expect when I first went to college. It was things of, like during the first midterms week, I know you had called me like 2 weeks before that and we were talking about, how exams were coming up and how I was stressed about it. Next thing I know, I went to go check my little mailbox in the dorm kind of common area and there was a package waiting for me. And I was like, I didn't order anything. Like, what is this? And then I open it up and it's a little box for my mom. And it wasn't anything huge, right? Maybe 20, $30 worth of stuff, but it was just sweet treats and some energy things and just some nice pick me ups, right? For midterms. And as much as it was the stuff, it was also the notes that came with it. It was the heartfelt things that said, hey, I believe in you. I see you working hard. I know you're working really hard on your classes. Keep it up. Those for me as a student were the types of things that kind of kept me going. And, there were some smaller things like whenever I would come home, my mom or my dad would slip me a $20 bill and be like, hey, have fun. Right. And so it wasn't necessarily big, huge, extravagant things, but it was just those little moments where I was able to know, like from my parents and my family, like, hey, we see you and we know you're not physically here with us, but we know you're working hard. So keep up the good work, basically.
Yeah, and I didn't have the luxury with you necessarily of being able to say, "Hey, which I do with Cade, let's go on a mom and son date and let's go out to dinner." Or if I notice that, he's struggling with something, I can make sure that a couple times that week I'm like, "I'm going to Quick Trip. Do you want a drink?" or whatever that might be. It just looks very different and you have to, be intentional. But it doesn't even have to be a box. Like that's nice, but like I know I have Venmoed you guys coffee money before, or I've done little convenient things just like when I was thinking about you, like something that was a low barrier to entry, right? But it still, I hope, made you feel like I was thinking of you. I think one of the other little things that as a parent was important for me is that we would do FaceTime rather than phone calls. Like it's great to hear your voice. And like even now, like a lot of times if you're out walking your dog or you're driving your car, like we're over the phone. But there's sometimes where you're walking across campus and you'll FaceTime me because I don't get to see you every day. Like I get to see Cade. And Cade does a lot of traveling and does a lot of dog sitting. And so like when there's periods when he's gone, I'm not used to that. And I feel a lot of the same types of pulls on my heart, right? That I did when you were gone. It's just in a different way. So
Mhm.
I was really lucky most of the time. All three of my kids, your sister's not here to speak for herself, but we're pretty much thriving in college. There were a few times that usually due to overwhelm on the part of you kids, right? Where your plates were just
Mhm.
really full and you were up against deadlines and you like, I would say you guys were thriving for the most part. And that's really exciting as a parent to have your child, right, doing really well in school. But it creates an identity issue for parents, right? Like we had a role in your life, and the whole goal is to be able to push that baby bird out of the nest and they fly. But then when they actually fly, you're like, oh, they don't need me anymore. So anything from the student side of that, or Sawyer from a college employee side of that, the parents' emotions around their child actually thriving. Any comments on that from either of you?
Yeah, I mean, I would jump in and say that like I think back so often to like move-in day when we're thinking about like the parent identity moment, right? I feel like that's really when it starts is, college is this mystical thing all summer long, all during senior year where you're buying the stuff for the dorm room and you're getting everything together. But then next thing you know, you drop the kid off and they're
Mhm.
excited to head off into welcome week activities and you're wearing your university mom or university dad shirt and you're getting in the car and you're like, well, I guess this is the end of that. And
Mhm.
I know for me, it was always difficult, I think, especially as like a new college student, to really try to see how big of a change it was, not only just for me, but also for my
Mhm.
parent. And like you mentioned, and I think Cade, have a really interesting perspective on this, but like for me, I was able to come home, two or three times a semester most of the time. And so, that's going from us seeing each other every day to only a few times every few
Mhm.
months, right? And so what that identity issue can look like is, oh my gosh, does my student or my kid not need me?
Mhm.
It's that the thing you just mentioned of like, oh, I'm pushing
Mhm.
them, they're ready to fly, and then they start flying, and you're like, why are they flying? They're flying a little too good to be flying by themselves, right? But I do think that your student thriving shows that you've done the work, right? You've
Mhm.
prepared your kid well, and that you've worked really hard at it. But I definitely think that there is that constant feeling of, a, I'm not super involved in my kid's life anymore, not as involved as I was at least, but B, who are my kids becoming when I'm not there to
Mhm.
necessarily be around? And Kate, I don't know what thoughts you have on kind of
Mhm.
how it changed with you being at home.
For sure. I think one thing with that is like kind of like you said, a lot of students, and I know, you mentioned it, and I also felt the same way, don't realize how much of an impact it is on their parents. And I think even just in society, there's such a focus on, oh, your kid is going through so much and they're changing and they're open to all these new opportunities and all that stuff. And while all of that is true and not invalidating that, the parents also do go through a change. But I think it's important as a parent to understand that that is kind of like, it's kind of like getting, paid after a week's long worth of work. Obviously it's 18 years and not a week, but it's like that is kind of the reward. That's what you're working towards.
Mhm.
There's no point in being a parent if you have to be a parent for 95 years. Like that's not the goal of being a parent. You want to be a parent so that way your student can go, or your kid can go and fly and thrive, whether that's in college or out in, their career, or whatever the situation is. And I think you have multiple of those events. If your kid goes to college, that's kind of one thing. And then maybe they get their first job and they move out of state. That's kind of a different thing. But that's kind of your end goal as a parent. So I think one thing for parents is to, although it is a struggle and obviously it's easier said than done, try to find that joy and that satisfaction of your kid not needing you and your kid, wanting to have that distance. Because like you said, Sawyer, that's what you've done your job. That's what you want to happen.
And I think so important for parents to have their own support group, and whether that is the child's other parent, whether that is the parent's spouse or their friend group
Mm-hmm.
or who that might be, like it is not the child's responsibility to help the parent facilitate that change in their own identity. You don't want your kid to be sitting off at college, worrying about the fact that their parent is so sad, sitting in their bedroom, crisscross applesauce on the middle of their bed, hugging their teddy bear with tears coming down their face. Like that,
Mm-hmm.
that does happen. But the kids are so involved in their life and they shouldn't be having to take a pause on that. That being said, I think there is a sensitivity piece that can be there for the student where they're not letting more than a week go by without calling their parent with a sign of life, or they're not trying to completely prove that they can do everything without their parents simply for the sake of proving it. Right now, again, we are talking about healthy parent-child relationships. Sometimes there's toxicity involved or things that make it necessary for a child to completely fly on their own, but that's not the framework in which we're discussing this right now. That would be for another day. Taking the opposite side of this, so we talked about students thriving. There were times that I have seen my own personal students in the form of my children struggling, right? Struggling doesn't mean, as Sawyer said, if you're a parent and your kid is thriving, it means you've done the work, which you have. Just because your student is struggling doesn't mean you haven't done the work. There could be a lot of other moving pieces that are off for that kid. So it could be wrong choice of school. It could be, maybe they don't want to be at school at all. It could be a bad roommate situation. It could be that there's, physical or mental health issues going unaddressed that are going on. It could be that they're just anxious and worried about what's happening. And so when we're talking about struggling students, Sawyer, from a professional viewpoint, or from your experience as a student yourself, what can parents do for their kid? Right? You can't say you're 13, I'm going to take you to a therapist, or you're 13, I'm going to take you to go get some anti-anxiety meds, or let's go talk to your school counselor about X, Y, or Z on your journey. What can you do as a parent with a college child, a full-grown adult, to help them use their resources? How can you advocate?
Yeah, and I think it's really important to talk about, right? Because I think you brought up a good point of like most of the time for I would say a large majority of students, they're over the age of 18. They're full legal adults, and so
Mm-hmm.
parents lose a lot of that power to kind of advocate for their kids, right? In those moments. And so what you have to do is first always like affirm and like acknowledge the fact that the feelings that they're having are real, right? If you disregard the anxiety or the nervousness or kind of whatever they're navigating, that can really push the student away, right? It could push your kid away from you. And so really being there for them is really important. One great thing about when a student is going to a college or a university is that there's a lot of resources on campus, whether that is mental health resources, counseling, whether that's physical health resources. A lot of universities have full health centers on campus. There's also a lot of additional resources. I know, especially during college for myself and for many other students, money can be really tight, right? And so there's
Mhm.
things like food pantries, events where there's food that is served, right? And so really encouraging your students to look at what resources their college or university offers and then taking advantage of them. When me and my mom went on our first college tour at the university that I attended for undergrad, they had this saying that I ended up using a lot, which was like free, which basically means you had already paid for it in your tuition. And so it was free to use at the point of service. And so whether it was just, hey, you need a day quill or a night quill to get through because you have a cold, whether it's going in and getting a full exam or some counseling, being able to really utilize the resources that they have on campus and within the local communities that the colleges are
Mhm.
as well. I think struggling is a common part of college and it's never going to be perfect. And like you mentioned, for me, I think oftentimes some of that struggle or some of that nervousness can come from really wanting to do things on your own, right? And for a lot of students, they're going in to figure out things on their own. But what they forget too is kind of on the same vein of using your resources, that there's a ton of college staff and faculty who are on the college campuses who are literally there to help your student, to help your kid, whether that's advisors, whether that's their professors who are teaching their classes. These are professionals that are here to help them kind of navigate when things do get tough or when they just need some additional support from a trusted adult that maybe isn't necessarily their parent. But again, a really easily accessible resource on campus.
It could be an older student, it could be an advisor, it could be, I always, in talking to people, I'm like, it could be the lunch lady, like literally, the lady working behind the counter that's there to smile at you every day when you're away at school. Kate, you had a different experience because you weren't on a campus, right? So you maybe I just wasn't aware, but kind of what resources do you think there are for off-campus kids who are struggling, or kids that are going online? How does that look different?
No, for me, my, school that I went to, we only were 30 minutes away from, and I know that all online students had the same availability to those resources and faculty that in-person students did. So if I wanted to get a meal plan, I could have. If I wanted to go see the counselors on campus, I could have. If I needed to go to the library to do research or whatever it is, I had access to those. I didn't use them just for me personally. I didn't feel like I needed them. And I also had resources outside of that. And I think, though, that's something too, because there are online students who their school is 5 hours away or it's across the country or things like that. So even though they may technically have access to that help, they don't, because it's just not feasible to get there. So I think in that instance, it's important to look at those resources around you. So kind of like we talked about, if you're struggling and you don't have the lunch lady or the guidance counselor to go talk to, you could talk to your friend or your family or your coworker or whoever, that person is in your life. And same thing too, you don't have the same resources of, the doctor's office on campus or things like that. But that's something you have to be, conscious of when you're making that choice of whether or not online school is right for you. And do you have resources to that outside of your school? I know there's a lot of students, kind of like you said, Sawyer, financially money is tight, where they were depending on, that food pantry or things like that. So, online school might not be the best option for you, or, look at a different food pantry, maybe just a nonprofit local food pantry in your community that doesn't need to be tied to the school. So I think you do have to get a little bit more creative, especially if you aren't close to your institution. But for students that are in person, definitely take advantage of those. And kind of like we talked about, your tuition is already paying for that. It's paying the staff, it's paying for those resources to be there. So you might as well use them to your advantage.
Yeah, and I would like to encourage students to think about who maybe the people are that are a little bit ahead of you on the path that might be resources for you if you don't want to rely on your parent to kind of give you guidance or help you, if somehow that feels to you like admitting defeat, or you don't want to worry them unnecessarily. Like, is it an aunt or uncle? Is it an older cousin? Is it a student that is a little bit, is it I know Sawyer had a GA ship for a while, and I know a lot of kids came to him maybe that he was not directly responsible for, but it's like he wasn't the professor, but he also wasn't the receptionist in the department. Like, he was kind of that middle level person. So I would encourage students to think about those people. Who are those people around you that can help you? But don't wait until you're in crisis mode, right, to figure out who those people are. Like, think about it now so that you've got some resources easily available to you. Same with the community resources.
For sure. I was saying, I think that is something valuable to apply to all areas of your life. I've been in jobs where my direct supervisor wasn't, or even, anyone up the chain of command wasn't necessarily the person that I would go to if I needed help and things. It could have been someone in a different department or at a different location or things like that. So I think kind of, that same mindset can apply to several things, whether it's school or a job or your family or things like that. But you really just have to think about who is going to be able to help you the most through that. So, obviously, if Sawyer was struggling with something in college, years back, he's not going to come to me, his younger brother, who's in 8th grade, to ask, how he should navigate doing his FAFSA or things like that. But, that's something that, mom could help with. But, vice versa. Then there were other things that, maybe mom hadn't experienced that I could relate to. So I think you really just have to find who or what is going to be that resource that you're able to use the most to your benefit. And it doesn't always need to be your professor that's able to, like, your calculus
Mhm.
professor might not be the person that you can learn calculus from. You might need to get a tutor, you might need to have your roommate do it, or things, or your roommate from college, if it's randomly selected, might not be your best friend in college. You need to go find friends somewhere else. So just, having that open mind to be able to find those resources wherever you can.
For sure. And let's be honest, eighth grade Cade probably could have figured out the FAFSA. Let's not lie.
True. Yeah.
I'm so happy when I got to unload that onto the kids for graduate school. A little bit about the pressure students might be feeling and where that pressure is coming from, especially when it's coming from parental expectations. I was very much a perfectionist as a kid, have worked on that for years and years and years, but I was the one putting all of the pressure on myself. So sometimes that's the case. But sometimes there are parents putting a lot of pressure on their kids. So, Kate, I'll start with you this time and then we'll ping pong to Sawyer. But as far as parental pressure on students, in your experience, like what have you seen? How would you suggest they handle that? What advice would you give to parents about that
For
pressure
sure.
they're putting on their kids?
I think for parents, it's important to take a step back and realize that it's your kid's life and your kid's journey and not yours. I think we talked about this on a previous episode, but there's parents who really want their kid to go to med school or to go to law school, or they really want them to be in this certain career path, or they want them to go to the same college that they went to, or different things like that. But I think it's important to kind of take those expectations off and just allow your student to be your student. And from a student perspective, it's okay to have an open conversation with your parents and tell them, honestly, but I don't care that you want me to be a doctor, or I don't care that you want me to go to this school because I wanted to go to this other school, or I want to be a lawyer instead of a doctor, or I want to be a teacher, or whatever it is. You as a student, it's okay to have that conversation, have that opinion. And I think that that is one thing that I know, just speaking from experience with, people in my circle and my friends, is a lot of the times they know they don't want to do what their expectations are. They just don't know how to either tell them that they don't want to do it, or they're afraid of what will happen. But I think that that's just a conversation that you have to have with your parent. And sometimes it's okay to realize that maybe that isn't a constructive conversation that you can have with your parent, and you just need to make that decision by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that goes to then finding support in other people around you. If your, parents will no longer, support you if you change your major or change your school or whatever it is, look for people who are going to be able to support you through that journey.
Thanks, Kate. Sawyer, how about you? That parental pressure, parental expectations.
Yeah, I think Kate, you kind of put it perfectly, right? I know what I've seen in my students and for myself too, right? There can be a lot of pressure, especially if the parents are footing the bill in terms
Mhm.
of what the child is going to do with their life. I think now, as we've gotten closer and closer to the newer generation kind of coming through the education system, they've really kind of taken ownership. The students I'm seeing today are really, what do I want to do with my life? Where do I want to be? But there is still that pressure of, hey, my dad and mom are both doctors and they want me to become a doctor. And if I'm not a doctor, they're not going to pay my tuition and then I can't go
Mm-hmm.
to college. And so for a lot of students, they can feel that pressure, whether that is a legitimate pressure, like their parents have
Mhm.
literally said, you have to be a doctor, else I'm not paying your tuition,
Uh-huh.
or it's a perceived pressure, right? This is something that I have to do. The other thing that I've seen that I think can kind of bleed out, not just outside of major, but really into then who your child becomes, is they can really lose that sense of agency, and they really kind of
Mm-hmm.
lose that ability to really step into who they are and really come into their own. If you remember parents when you were 18 years old and kind of where your mind was at, it's a lot of trial and error and figuring out who you are and what you
Mm-hmm.
like and what you don't and where you want to be, and really being able to kind of step into your own is a really important aspect of
Mhm.
not just college, but in being a big, right? In being someone over the age of 18 and really growing into your own person. And so when that pressure is perceived or real, it can really, set the student back a long way. And unfortunately, I know we all have seen folks in our life and kind of just in society in general, but who, will go to college and get full degrees and then they don't ever get full-time jobs, right? And they go back and they work, part-time jobs and live really close to their parents or sometimes even with their parents, right? And so
Hmm.
it's kind of the opposite goal, right? Of getting your degree, getting that career, and then kind of moving into your own and kind of stepping into your own self as a human. And so really being able to allow your students to, yeah, kind of come into their own, and parents as much as possible, really being able to acknowledge, like Kate said, like this is your student's journey,
Mhm.
your kid's journey, and really allowing them to have their own experience. And I think
Mhm.
this is a good kind of follow-up question for you, mom, of, you had both some kids who went off and, either went to colleges far away or even out of state, but also you had some that lived with you. So what was it like in terms of kind of like setting the expectations or like
Mhm.
putting restrictions on us on what our
Mhm.
experience was going to look like or what it was going to be?
Yeah, I think I was fairly lucky. I grew up with parents who weren't, and this is not unique to college situations, but parents who were not living vicariously through me, right? Neither of my parents went to college, but the pressure on me was not to go to college because they didn't. Much like, people are, dance moms, cheer moms, football parents, over involved, overexcited, living vicariously through their child, right? So sometimes parents who did not have the college experience really want that to look a certain way for their kid. And so I think parents really need to put themselves in check and make sure that they have their own aspirations for their own life so that that is not bleeding over into their child and they're expecting their child to do things that really it's something they wish they had done themselves or an opportunity they wish they had had. So sometimes what that looks like is those parents who are putting restrictions on their child, which then will alter the experience that kid is having or the success they have in their own life. So that being said, I think there are some expectations that can be reasonable, right? So a couple of them that come to mind for me. So if you have a parent who is helping their child pay their tuition, and, parents don't have a lot of rights. Like their child has to sign off. Yes, you can see my account at the college.
Hmm.
Yes, you can see my grades at the college. Yes, when I go to the dentist or the doctor, you can see my result. Like they can be on my insurance till they're 26, but they turn 18 and I can't see if their shot record's current. I mean, crazy stuff like that. And it's just the world we live in, right? And so I think it's really important to say to your kid, okay, my expectation is if I am helping you with tuition, that I am able to see your grades, right? Or that I am able to see the account. Or the conversation might need to happen that I need you to be responsible for X, Y, and Z. I expect you to show me your grades at the end of the semester. Your child could get put on academic probation and you would have no idea if you weren't able to see the report card, if that's even the word they use, or or if your child isn't physically showing you that they completed those classes and got the grades, right? As a parent, I'm not going to continue to foot the college bill for a child who is repeatedly failing classes, right? Like they might have to retake that class, which they will then pay for on their own, right? That's
Hmm.
how things kind of worked in our household. So I think that, there just are some expectations, that parents can legitimately have if they are helping to contribute. Now, if parents are not contributing financially, and I know as a life coach, I have dealt with this conversation many, many times, helping parents realize that if you are not in some form or fashion still supporting your child financially, you don't get to put restrictions on their life. If they don't live with
Hmm.
you, if you're not paying their tuition, you're not paying for their room and board, you're not helping in any way, you can have things you wish they would do, but you don't get to put that on them because
Hmm.
you can't have it both ways. Kate and I did a whole episode on authority versus responsibility. And we were talking primarily about the kids, but it happens the other way with the parents too. Like you don't get all the authority if you're not carrying the
Hmm.
responsibility. So it goes both ways. So I think those restrictions, but within reason and only if you are supporting your kid in some form or fashion. I think there are responsibilities. We'll kind of turn that conversation a little bit like which things should fall to the kids and which things should be the parents. At the start of this school year, I had several friends whose kids were starting college and their parent was like, oh my goodness, I don't know when the tuition is due. Oh my goodness, I don't know if they filled out the scholarship application. Oh my goodness, I don't know when move-in day is. Like, what things, Sawyer, in your estimation, coming from the professional side, should fall to the student, and what things do the parent, if anything, need to be responsible for?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I think you were a good model for this. And Kate, feel free to jump in too with your thoughts. But I think from the beginning, right? You were very much like if you're go. Wait, first of all, college was never or college and career training was never really an option. Like we knew after high school we were going to do some form of further education,
Hmm.
but we knew that it was kind of on us to
Mhm.
figure it out. We were the ones applying to the colleges and universities. I don't even think you even looked at our applications to
Mhm.
college. You were like, okay, fill them out. When you did help us with the FAFSA, but it was one of those things where you did it for us the first year, we did it together the second year, and by the third year, you were watching us do it, and we were full
Hmm.
set, ready to go. But especially when it comes to things relating to money or communicating with the university in any way, that's 100% on the student, right? We do, like you mentioned a little bit, Mom, there are some backdoor loopholes to allow parents to have access to financial aid accounts and things like that that can go in and pay tuition bills. But I really do think it's really important that as your student is gaining agency over their life and the quote unquote fun parts of being an adult, deciding what they get to do on the weekends, what they get to eat, all of that, they also need to pick up some of that responsibility in terms of making sure that their tuition bill is paid on time and that
Hmm.
if they're not going to be in a class that they're reaching out to their faculty or XYZ. Believe it or not, I saw something viral go on of moms of freshmen this year in college who were setting up play dates for their first year freshmen in college. And they were coordinating on the parent group chats for the college of like, hey, does little Cade want to play with little Sawyer on Friday for a little play date? It's like they were talking about 18-year-old kids, right? And so there really needs to be that ability for, again, students to really kind of have that separation of what that looks like day to day.
For sure. And I think that's important too for kids to learn just in general in their future, to be able to take that responsibility of making sure their tuition is paid and things like that. Cause then that turns into making sure that your rent is paid or your mortgage is paid and your lights don't get shut off. And just kind of teaches them that responsibility. And as a parent too, depending on, how you're helping them and things like that, it also kind of gives you're still there kind of as a safety net for them for if they do mess up when they fill out their FAFSA, maybe have experience and you can fill it out. So I think that that's something that's good to have. But Mom, as a parent, was there any struggle of kind of handing over that
Mhm.
responsibility, or you wanting to take on more but having to kind of hold yourself back because you knew we needed to learn, or what was that like from a parent perspective?
I think for myself, having experienced college on my own, right? And I went to college way back in the day where when you were registering for classes, you went to this big auditorium and there were people sitting behind 8 foot long tables. And you had to go and like physically pull a card for the class that you wanted. And if there were no cards left, you didn't get that class and you would race around the room. You were assigned a day and a time and you would race around the room trying to get your classes to all work together. And there were kids who would decide, oh, I don't want this class. And instead of taking the card back, they would drop it on the floor. So there really was a spot in that class, but you didn't know. Like, so I knew if I could navigate all of that and successfully graduated from college while changing my minor and getting out in 4.5 years, right? I was convinced that you guys would be able to figure it out. And so I really wanted that to be your experience. And I also, in my professional experience as a manager, had experienced people's parents calling to set up interviews, to call in sick for their kid, to call and complain about something that their adult kid, even a 16-year-old kid, if you're old enough to have a job working for me, you are old enough to deal with me on your own. I don't talk to mommies and daddies on the phone if you are working for me. So I think it's an important skill for kids to learn in college. That's like that transition period for some people. Some people have been working full-time jobs, right, since they were younger, and have figured that out for themselves. But I think it's really important to do that. But I think you can be a guide for things like, I remember Sawyer and I sitting down and like we had printed off like, here's your major, right? And here's your minor that you want, and here's the classes that are required for just a regular degree, and then here's the specific core classes you have to take, and making sure we were being strategic about which classes he took so he had his prereqs before he needed to take something else. I think
Hmm.
colleges have gotten a lot better, Cade, when I've watched your experience versus Sawyer's experience, even in a brief period of time, 4 or 5 years, they've gotten much better at their college advising systems, and they've got all these online checklists now that are beautiful, and you can see, oh, look, I have this many credits left and
Hmm.
I need this many more things. Those didn't exist back in the day, right? So I think parents can be there as a guide. I think it's important as a parent, have your kid's school calendar. Like, you have access to that. Anybody can Google the calendar
Mhm.
for their kid's school. So you do know when school breaks are. So you do kind of know what that might look like. You know when midterms are. So if you would like to send your child a care package, you can do that, right? So it's more of as a guide, like, you get the notice as a parent October 1st that the FAFSAs are now open for the following school year. So if your child's responsible for filling that out, just planting those reminders, not hounding
Mhm.
them, but making sure that that's there. So I think there's definitely a role parents can play, but it needs to be in a healthy manner and not taking power away from their child and those growth opportunities, for
For
sure.
sure.
I know as a parent, one of the scariest things that I had to deal with was if my kid was sick. If they were away and they were sick, or they were away and I really thought there was anxiety or depression going on. And I have a lot of friends who have dealt with this, and you're just straight up scared because you're not there to see your kid every single
Mhm.
day. So you can see their records if you don't have help. So, or don't have permission. So, as far as help for kids that age, I would like to hear what both of you had to say about healthcare in general and mental health care, and how you would suggest to parents they handle supporting their child through that. So, Sawyer, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, I would say the first thing that's really important, and obviously this will be a better piece of advice for the newer parents than the ones who are maybe at big level right now, but it's starting at the foundation early, right? One thing my mom did really well, even when times were tough and the family was super busy, we never ever missed a doctor's appointment. Ever.
Mhm.
Dentist appointments, doctor's appointments, eye doctor's appointments, all of that. And so really, throughout my life, that was kind of just a set routine. It was like, okay, every 6 months we go to the dentist, every year we get a physical done, right? All of those different pieces. So it just kind of modeled to me, and those subtle reminders really helped me as well. One other piece that I would say too, especially for students who are, going away to college or even just going to college in general, is that the health looks a little bit different, especially because they're managing it themselves. And so they might not
Mhm.
be taking their vitamins anymore. They might not be, doing all the things that you had regimented for them. But it's going to be just giving those subtle reminders and encouragements. But I think the biggest factor that often hits college students is the mental health piece, whether that is anxiety, whether that's the overwhelm, whether that's, feelings of isolation. It can be really challenging for college students to navigate that. And I know that I went through multiple instances where especially the overwhelm and the anxiety really got to me. And what ultimately helped was, really again utilizing those resources on campus and actually talking to people about it. I think we're finally getting better about talking about mental health and kind of advocating around mental health, but it's still something that we really need to focus on and work towards kind of improving more and just having more mainstream. But Cade, what would you say around health and mental health for
For
students?
sure. I think it's definitely something that parents can encourage, but I think if they are too overbearing, it can end up kind of deterring the student away from that. And the topic of healthcare, if you're constantly reminding your kid, oh, well, did you go to the dentist? Did you go to the dentist? Or did you go to the doctor? Did you go to the doctor? Are you taking your vitamins? Are you taking your vitamins? It kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier. If you're a parent not giving your student that, ability to be on their own. Obviously, that can be a little different if, they have some life-saving medication that they need to take every day and they're not taking it or things like that. But like you said, things like not taking their vitamins or not taking their allergy medicine, if they choose not to do that, they're the ones that have to pay that consequence of it. So, you can kind of encourage it, but don't harp on it too much. I know there's been times where mom and I have had disagreements over
Mhm.
things being where I felt like she was being too overbearing of, oh, did you do this? Did you do this? And I got to the point where I had to tell her, I just don't want you to worry about it. I haven't done it and I'm not going to do it. And it's just easier. It's easier for you that you don't need to worry about it. And I'm not annoyed because you're not asking me every week. And again, that wasn't, a life saving medicine or things like that. That's a little bit different. And then with mental health too, I think that's why it's so important to have those open and honest conversations with your kids, because a lot of times if your kid is depressed or anxious or they're going through something mentally, they're not going to tell you, hey mom, hey dad, I'm depressed, or hey mom, hey dad, I'm anxious, or hey mom, hey dad, I've just been feeling really down lately and I don't know what to do. But if you're checking in with your kid every week or several times a week and you're just asking them how things are going, you can catch up on the cues that, okay, in September they were hanging out with their friends and they were going to parties and they were going to these, Greek life events and they were doing and they were getting all A's and whatever. And then in February, 6 months later, they're staying in their dorm every weekend and they're failing tests and they're things like that. So that's when you can kind of pick up on those signs, or they go from calling you 2, 3 times a week to calling you once every other week. There's things like that where I feel like sometimes parents look for very bland, obvious, oh, I'm struggling with something, instead of finding those little cues to pick up on. So I think that that's something that's very important. And also for a big talking to your parents, being able to, if you have that relationship, have that conversation with your parents. I know this isn't the situation for everyone, but mom has gone to college before, so she's had that experience. Or if it's something with your dating life, your parents have dated someone before, or if it's something, anything like that, most of the time your parents have gone through what you're going through before. It might be a little bit different. There's obviously, we're in a different world now than we were back then, but they can still kind of offer that perspective. So I think having that open and honest conversation is very beneficial. But mom, as a parent, what does that look like for you? Either how you check in on your kids for their health and their mental health, and two, how you handle that if something is going on.
And I think for a parent, it's really important to kind of be in tune with, and you should know by the time your child's 18, right? What does my child look like when they are feeling just straight up overwhelmed, right? Like life is just a lot. And I think, we are learning more about mental health in society, but I think we are also very quick to label things that sometimes, and I know Sawyer, you and I worked through this at one point in time. It was the simple things like, are you taking your vitamins? Are you drinking enough water? Are you getting any sunshine? Are you walking at all? Like what are you doing that are like healthy life choices that might help keep you centered? Or maybe your calendar is too full. What things can we take off your plate to lower your anxiety level? So I think it's very important to know who your child is going in, right? And then to just kind of be aware of how heavy is the load on their plate, and are they getting their basic needs met? All of those things are true. Their load's not too big and their needs are being met, and they're still exhibiting those signs and symptoms without even telling you directly that maybe they're anxious or depressed or there's something mental health concern going on. Being willing to ask non-judgmental questions, right? And just, hey, are you feeling okay? Are you worried about something? They may choose to not tell you, at which point you can again point out those resources. But I think it's also then important to know, when is your child truly calling out for help? Like, and I know I've had this conversation too. You live here, your sister is close, but like I have said to Sawyer, if I need to get in the car and come, I will get in the car and come. So I think it's important to know when the red flags are going up and how to get your student help. Who's in their life? Who, like, I always found it valuable when I knew kind of who their friends were, when I knew, I love it when I have a person on the ground where my child lives, because like if I'm feeling like, hey, maybe Sawyer's having a really tough time right now, I can call my Vancouver peeps and I can say, hey, can you check in on Sawyer for me? So I think as a parent, it's just knowing who your child is going in, checking in with them, making sure their basics and everything are met, but then knowing when there really is a red flag. Sometimes you might need to go pick them up for the weekend. Sometimes they're just really overwhelmed and they're just feeling, they might be sick. That happens a lot. Kids will get a bad cold or, pneumonia or bronchitis, and they're not taking care of themselves, and they just need to come home for a few days and rest and relax. So know that that is okay and successful. It doesn't mean your child is failing. It doesn't mean you're failing as a parent. It just means they need a little extra TLC, in the moment. Same thing if you've got a kiddo that lives with you, and normally they're like making an appearance in the kitchen in the common space once in a while, and they're telling you good night every night, and then all of a sudden they're not doing those things. Or their patterns change and they're like gone a lot more than normal. Things like that. You can be aware of that in the same situation, or if your kids live in the same town as you and you usually, are texting with them on an every other day basis, and you realize 4 days have gone by and they haven't texted. Like, pick up the phone and call them. Like, it doesn't hurt, but they'll tell you if you're calling them too much or completely back off. So I think it's important to talk about, what success looks like. We've talked about some of the hard things, but I know, a lot of parents are like, oh, everything's tied up with a pretty bow. My child has decided what they're doing, what school they're going to, how they're getting their education. They're going to this trade school. The program's going to last 9 months. Then they're getting a job. My child's got their apartment. They've gotten a job. all of a sudden, but like there is a pivot or something isn't going right.
Hmm.
And it's not necessarily a failure. So, what does success look like for a kiddo who's going to college? And I'm not talking about securing that 4-year degree. Who wants to take it first?
I can. I think, of course, the success is the degree, of course, right? But what the success actually is the success is your kid being able to come into their own and to be able to stand on their own 2 feet and
Hmm.
feel really good about where they are, who they are, and where they hope to become and who they hope to become. I think so often for us, especially in Americanized society, it's you're gonna get into college, you're gonna go to college, you're gonna get an internship, you're gonna get a job, and it's gonna be perfect. It it rarely works out that way. There's
Hmm.
a lot of bumps in the road, and things change often. And so, I think for me personally, and what I hope, Mom, your vision of what success looked like for us was, really finding for me what I was actually passionate about, what I wanted to do in this life, what brought me fulfillment, finding a way to make it a career, and then just chasing those dreams. And I think you've been a really good example for us as your kids about how when things pivot or when dreams change to chase them, and that it's not always going to look the same. I
Hmm.
started out college as a pre-veterinary medicine major and ended up graduating with a graduate degree in education. And so, that path is going to look very different where you start versus where you end. But really being able to like enjoy the journey and take that time to really step into who you are and figure out who you want to be at the end of this.
For
Love that
sure.
answer, Cater.
I was going to say kind of something similar. I think the success of college and just coming into your own as an adult isn't a degree or isn't a job or isn't things like that, but it's what you learn along the way. Both what you learn about yourself, you learn what kind of people you want to be around and, what kind of job you want and how you like to function and things like that. But also the things you learn, kind of like we talked about earlier, you learn, okay, if I don't pay my tuition on time, I'm not in class. So then that transfers into, okay, if I don't pay my rent on time, I don't have a place to live. So I think that you learn about time management and just things like that, that I think you learn along the way. And that to me is more so why I'm an advocate for college, is so that kids have that opportunity to do that, because it kind of gives you a safe space to mess up for kind of that reason. It gives you a place where, okay, if I realize, okay, I'm not good at having a super busy schedule, I can realize that in college and make some changes versus already being out in the real world and having more serious consequences. So I think that success is just kind of what you learn along the way and how that journey looks for you.
For sure. And for me as a parent, it was my kids, right, being able to reach their full potential, whatever that is that they would like to do. I raised lifelong learners. I myself am a lifelong learner. And so I don't think any of our human growth and development, our personal development is ever done, right? You're always
Mhm.
growing and changing. And I hope they always have visions and dreams. And I think college, no matter what form in which you do that, is a great place to do that. As a parent, one of my very, very favorite parts about college with a kiddo that was away at college was when they're coming home to make visits, right? That being said, I think it's important for parents to understand that, especially those of you who have not seen your child since you dropped them off in August or September, and they're coming home for the first time for Thanksgiving or the holidays, this may be a very different human than you dropped off at the dorm. They have been in charge of their own self now for a while. And so they have a long list of people they want to see, favorite things they want to go do when they come home. And parents, a lot of times, are like, oh, they're going to be home. We're going to play games. I'm going to make all their favorite meals. We're going to have sleepovers. Like the agendas can be very different. So, as a parent, like I always really looked forward to those weekends, right? When all of my ducks, I used to say, were all under the same roof. And I never sleep so well as when all of my ducks are under the same roof. Like, because I know even though I'm not actively worrying about them, my brain always has
Mhm.
them somewhere in the periphery, right? I'm a parent, that's what I do. But the visits home, I think, are important for me as a parent. How would you guys, and Kate, maybe you could even speak since you've lived at home, but speak from a sibling experience. The
Mhm.
dynamic changes when one of the older kids goes off to college or moves out. So maybe what your experience is like when they come back home. But for Sawyer, for someone who went away to college, those visits coming home, what advice would you give the kids and the parents about that?
Yeah, so the first thing I would give to the kids is really look forward to them. Like I mentioned, I only came home 2 to 3 times a semester typically, and so I really did look forward to those home visits home. Not only as an opportunity to like see my family and really just kind of take some time off, but also just to like see my friends, be back in a city that which I know, be back in my hometown. I will say though, for the parents, right, when your kid comes back home from college, and I'm sure my mom will speak to this, they will sleep like the dead. They will just be so exhausted and will sleep a lot. And so not only that, but they'll probably eat you out of house and home as well. Those home cooked meals always were really great for me as a student coming home. But I think the thing that I would say that's really important for parents is to remember that for them, you might have this image in your head about what this experience is going to be, what your kids coming back home is going to be like. And it very well might not be that. They might have homework. They, like I said, might be sleeping. They might have plans with their friends. And so, really being open to what those experiences could potentially be and just getting and loving on them and getting to spend
Mhm.
time with them and love on them as much as you can.
Sure. And I think from a sibling perspective, who had older siblings that, went away to college and then would come back home, kind of like you said, Mom, they do come back almost as a different person. They learn a lot, they are exposed to a lot, they change a lot. And in our situation, that all turned out good. I think all three of us, we throughout our lives have kind of had ebbs and flows in our relationships where maybe me and Sawyer will be closer, me and Kinsey will be closer, Kinsey and Sawyer will be closer. And that's natural. There were times when Sawyer and Kinsey were both in high school and I was still in middle school. And so obviously they're closer. When Sawyer was away in college and me and Kinsey were both in high school, obviously we were closer. And not that I, like Sawyer any less or anything like that, but that's just the way the relationship naturally flows. So I think as a sibling and as a kid, being open to that and understanding that, when your siblings come home, or if you are the sibling coming home, it may take a little bit to readjust to that. Your sibling might get on your nerves a little bit more than you, or maybe you and your siblings for a while hadn't gotten along. And then now when you come back, you do get along. And same thing with your parents. There may be things where you've learned a lot and now you and your parents don't agree on something, or you've changed and you and your parents spent the past 6 years while you were living at home and going through puberty fighting, and now you guys are best of friends. So I think being open to that, and both from a big and a parent perspective, understanding that that change is going to happen and that there's going to be those differences there.
And homecomings and school vacations, right, are pretty short. And so just enjoy that time you have together. The first summer after freshman year, if your child comes home from college away, that's a whole nother podcast because that can really be an interesting thing to maneuver. Most people that I know, their child comes home the first summer and doesn't come home again. So I think there's a lot of expectations of what that's going to be like. And for most people, that doesn't turn out that. Talk about that another day. Sawyer, because we do have someone in the house that has experience working at the college level, can you please address like the process to becoming a college student, the affordability, the accessibility? A lot of people, I think, especially in economy times like this, feel like it's out of reach. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is one of the biggest like misconceptions or myths, honestly, that's out there right now. So often, especially in, the last 5 or so years, there's been a lot of scrutiny surrounding college tuition, the return on investment for getting a college education, and really what that looks like. But I would honestly say that, like you mentioned, college is more accessible and oftentimes more affordable than you think it is. I know where I'm at here in Washington State, we have a really great state financial aid program where about 60% of students at the institution that I work for right now actually pay nothing out of pocket to attend. They don't pay a single penny out of pocket to attend. I know quite a few students, almost I would say upwards of 100, who are currently getting paid to go to school based on grants and scholarships alone. And so there are lots of opportunities to be able to access, a college education, advance your degree. Then I will also say too, oftentimes when people are talking about insane tuition prices or out of reach possibilities, they're talking about the big huge division 1 schools, right? I would always advocate for folks who are looking to just kind of access or get into education is look at your local community college, look at your local division 2 or division 3 school. oftentimes they will not only be more affordable financial wise, but they will have some kind of lower barriers to access. And so whether that's cheaper application fees, whether that's easier ways to get in, whether that's programs that actually allow you to enter them without taking exams or taking classes, really being able to access that college degree is right around the corner. It might be closer and affordable than you might think.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Sawyer. And, Kate, I'm going to let you give advice to kids about bringing their parents into their experience and making them feel a little bit a part of it, just so that it's not all about the kid. And, parents truly have their kids' best interests at heart 99.9% of the time. So what advice would you give the kids to bringing their parents into the experience?
For sure. I think one way to do that while keeping the boundary of being able to grow on your own and have your own experience is to not try to involve your parent, but try to share with them. Your parent doesn't need to come to everything or to help you with this and help you with that, but just say, oh, we did this really cool thing, or I went to this fun party, or I went to this fun event, or things like that. Instead of, maybe, oh, you should come down to this event and see this. And I think that there is a time and a place for that. Obviously, depending on where your school is at and your family situation, your parent is probably going to want to come visit you, and you may want that. But I also think it's important to not have them there for everything, because there's almost kind of that excitement. And Mom, maybe you can say this is incorrect, but there's almost kind of that excitement of a parent of not being there for it and being able to hear about it. There's that, instead of being able to experience it with them, you're able to allow your kid to have that experience on their own, while also still hearing about it and still being involved, and finding that balance of not cutting your parent completely out. I know for me, especially, that is one thing that I think we've had to work on, and not necessarily work on, but I've found a good place for that. It is easy to feel like sometimes I don't have that independence, and like you're so over involved in my life, because you just naturally see everything I'm doing. If I'm having a stressful week, you're going to see it because we live together. If I am spending a lot of time writing this paper, you're going to see that. If I'm going to this party, you're going to see that because I'm telling you, hey, Mom, I'm headed out, blah, 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 whatever. But so I think it's important to kind of find that balance of not having your parent involved, but just having them informed. And again, there's times and places, big things like homecoming or things like that, you might want your parent there to experience that and show them around and show them, your favorite restaurant in your college town and things like that. But it's also important. It's kind of like the saying, absence makes the heart grow fonder, having your parent miss out on that. And one, too, for the kid to be excited to tell their parent something. That way, when we talk about those FaceTime calls and things like that, you're able to say, hey, Mom, guess what I did today? Instead of you calling and not having anything to say because your mom has come down every single weekend to see what's going on. So I think that it's important to find that balance of keeping them informed, but not overly involved.
Yes. Or the child has come home every weekend. I know that happens with some people's kids. And so are they getting a chance to truly become invested in their college experience if they're going home every weekend? Or would it be better if, they stay sometimes on the weekend? Anything about that specific topic, Sawyer, before we round it up here?
I think the only thing I would say is definitely, it's keep them informed, but also do the little things, right? Like, I don't know that my mom necessarily loved the whole hullabaloo of parents weekend, but I know she loved coming up to see me and getting to see campus. I know she wore that Emporia State University mom shirt until there was holes in it. Okay. So it's like, buy them the hoodie, buy them the parent t-shirt. They'll love it. And, if your parent loves sports, bring them out to a football game. If they just love cute things, bring them to the fall festival in town. But definitely strike that balance and know that your parents are usually just as excited for you as you are for them.
That's for sure. Well, today we've covered some really important tips on supporting our college students. So I'd like to thank you for joining us, Sawyer, for sharing your knowledge, personal and professional experience with our audience today. I sure hope you will join us again. And with that, Cade, would you like to close us out of this episode of Raising Big?
For sure. We appreciated having you on, Sawyer, and appreciate everything, you had to contribute to the conversation. Nice to have another big here with me. But with that being said, this is a wrap for this episode of Raising Bigs. We thank you all for listening today, and thank you, Sawyer, for joining us for this episode. We hope you found some takeaways, a fresh perspective, and maybe even an action step or two in this episode. Above it all, we hope it opens conversation between parents and bigs to have open and honest conversation about what's going on in their life. We are definitely not experts, but we can authentically share what we're learning in hopes of making the path a little bit easier for those who are listening. You can find this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. Please subscribe and share with those in your circles who you think might benefit from hearing it.
A new podcast episode comes out every week. You can visit my life coaching website at marcyhawkinson.com or email me at lifecoachmarcy.com. I'm also on Facebook at Life Coach Marcy and Instagram at life_coach_Marcy. Sawyer, I'm going to give you a chance to tell our listeners where they can find you. And then Kate, if you want to give us your handle and we'll go from there.
Thank you so much for having me today. You can find me on LinkedIn, Sawyer Berrigan, Sawyer. And then you can also find me on Facebook, Sawyer Berrigan on there as well.
And Kate.
Sure. And my handle across all social media platforms is the Cade Berrigan. The best way to contact us, or if you want to give us feedback or ask any questions, is to DM either one of us on social media or to reach out on the contact me page on my mom's website. Again, that is marcyhawkinson.com. We appreciate any feedback, topic ideas, or questions that you may like to share, and we will see you next time on Raising Bigs.